The universe does not care about survivors. It does not adjust its physics for the desperate, does not soften its distances for the hunted, does not pause its indifferent machinery to acknowledge that somewhere in the dark, the last remnants of a civilization are running out of places to run. The universe simply continues, vast, cold, governed by laws that predate every species that has ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. What happens, then, when two civilizations built on entirely different answers to that question find each other at the exact moment when both are certain the answer is something they cannot afford to be wrong about? If you want to see more crossover stories that crash science fiction's greatest universes together, hit that subscribe button and drop your dream crossover in the comments below. Live long and prosper. Now let's find out what happens when Galactica jumps into the wrong universe entirely. The FTL jump was never supposed to go this far. Lieutenant Gaeta's calculations had been sound, they always were, but the Cylon attack had forced the jump at precisely the wrong moment, the base star's gravity weapon distorting the jump field during spin-up in ways that no colonial navigator had ever modeled because no colonial navigator had ever survived the conditions that produced them. Galactica lurched out of FTL in a cascade of proximity alarms and damage reports, her hull groaning with the particular complaint of a ship that had been asked to do something her designers had never intended. Commander William Adama gripped the CIC railing and waited for the noise to stop. That was the first discipline of command. Wait for the noise to stop before you assess, because assessment requires information and information requires functioning sensors and functioning sensors required approximately 4 seconds after a bad jump for the system reboot to complete. He had learned this over 30 years of service. He applied it now. With the unknown, extended the hand of civilization across the void, and meant it. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the USS Enterprise. You are in Federation space. We've detected significant damage to your vessels and multiple distress signals. We're here to help. Please respond. The CIC was quiet. 30 years of military service had given Adama an excellent ear for voices that meant what they said and voices that said what they meant. This one, filtered through translation software that was doing impressive work on the fly, sounded like the latter. It sounded, Adama thought, dangerously like someone he might be able to trust. Which was exactly the kind of thinking that got people killed. This is Commander William Adama, Battlestar Galactica, commanding the colonial fleet. He kept his voice level, giving nothing. We've had a navigational emergency. We're looking for our scattered ships and we need time to make repairs. A pause, precisely calibrated. We appreciate the offer of assistance. We'll need to discuss terms. On the Enterprise bridge, Picard heard the careful neutrality in that voice and recognized it for what it was, not hostility, but the particular wariness of someone who had learned that openness was a vulnerability. He had heard that quality before, in species that had been burned by first contact gone wrong, in individuals who had survived things that made trust an expensive proposition. Counselor, he said quietly to Troy, impressions. Deanna Troi had been reading the emotional tenor of the transmission since the channel opened. What she felt coming through the carrier wave was not aggression, not deception, but something that sat in her chest with unexpected weight. Exhaustion, she said. Profound, structural exhaustion. And grief. Whatever happened to these people, it wasn't recent. They've been carrying it for a long time. She paused. And fear, Captain. Not of us specifically. Of everything. They're afraid of everything. With the same flat patience he applied to everything. Drotty's contact, Gaeta called. Multiple contacts, but sir, these aren't Cylon. The drive signatures are completely unknown. How many of our ships made the jump? Still counting. 31 confirmed so far. The rest, Gaeta paused, and the pause carried more information than the words that followed. Scattered, sir. The jump field fragmented. They could be spread across several light years. Adama looked at the Drotty's display. The unknown contacts were moving, not with the aggressive geometry of a Cylon intercept but with the cautious, measured approach of something that had detected them and was deciding what to do about it. One contact was significantly larger than the others, moving to intercept at a velocity that colonial sensors translated into something between confusion and admiration. Get me a visual. The ship on Galactica's main screen was unlike anything in colonial records. Saucer-shaped forward section, 2 cylindrical nacelles aft, running lights and patterns that suggested active systems rather than combat posture. It was large, not Galactica large, but substantial, and it moved with the unhurried confidence of something that had never needed to be afraid of whatever it encountered. President Laura Roslin, who had come to CIC when the proximity alarms triggered and who stood now at Adama's left with the composed authority of a woman who had been dying for months and had decided that death did not excuse her from her responsibilities, studied the image quietly. "They're hailing us," Dee reported from the communications station. "Multiple frequencies. Universal pattern, they're trying to find one we can understand." "They're smart," Roslin said. "Everyone's smart until they're not," Adama said. But he nodded to Dee. "Open a channel. All frequencies." The voice that came through was measured, precise, carrying the particular quality of someone who had done this before, made contact with. Picard nodded once. Set his expression into the particular configuration of a man extending genuine welcome to people who had forgotten what genuine welcome felt like. "Mr. Data," he said, "begin compiling everything our sensors can tell us about their technology and point of origin. Mr. Worf, stand down from yellow alert." He looked at the main view screen, at the battered, beautiful, impossibly resilient ship holding position in Federation space like something that had been through hell and come out the other side still flying. "These people need help. Let's make sure we're ready to provide it." The Enterprise moved alongside Galactica at matching velocity, and the contrast between the two ships was the kind of thing that said everything about the civilizations that had built them without requiring a single word of explanation. The Enterprise was clean, purposeful, her lines flowing with the confident elegance of a vessel designed by people who believed the universe was fundamentally worth exploring. Galactica was scarred. Hull plates patched over patches, carbon scoring from weapons impacts that had never been fully repaired because there had never been time, her silhouette carrying the accumulated damage of a civilization's last stand the way a survivor carries scars. Beautiful in the way that things which have refused to die are always beautiful. But marked. Data had spent 40 minutes processing sensor data on the colonial fleet and had arrived at a set of conclusions that he delivered to the senior staff briefing with the precise, unhurried thoroughness that made him simultaneously the most reliable and occasionally the most unsettling presence in any room. The colonial fleet consists of 37 vessels, now confirmed after locating the 6 scattered ships, he began. Their faster-than-light technology operates on principles fundamentally different from Federation warp drive, a folded space jump mechanism that produces instantaneous displacement rather than sustained velocity. It is extraordinarily sophisticated in its own framework but incompatible with our navigation infrastructure. He paused. The civilian population aboard the fleet vessels is approximately 49,371 individuals. Based on the composition of the fleet. Passenger liners, freighters, a luxury vessel, a school ship, I assess with high confidence that this represents the total surviving population of their civilization. The briefing room absorbed that number in silence. Their entire civilization, Counselor Troy said quietly. That is my assessment, yes. Picard looked at the sensor imagery of Galactica on the briefing room display, the battered warship holding position off the Enterprise's port bow with the stubborn solidity of something that had decided stopping was not an option. What happened to them? They have not shared that information directly. However, sensor analysis of their hull damage patterns, ammunition expenditure levels, and the psychological profiles Counselor Troy has assembled suggest an extended military campaign against a technologically comparable adversary. Data tilted his head slightly. There is also evidence of nuclear weapons deployment, both offensive and defensive, on a scale consistent with civilizational conflict rather than conventional warfare. Genocide, Worf said. He said it without drama, as a military man naming a military reality. That would be consistent with the available evidence, Data confirmed. Picard stood and moved to the viewport. The fleet was visible as scattered lights against the star field, 37 vessels of varying sizes and configurations, none of them built for what they were doing, all of them doing it anyway. We extend full humanitarian assistance. Food, medical supplies, repair support where our technology is compatible. He turned back to the table. And we request a face-to-face meeting with their commander. Aboard the Enterprise, if they'll accept. They won't, Troy said. Everyone looked at her. Not yet. Commander Adama, the emotional signature I'm reading from their command frequency suggests someone who makes decisions based on control of environment. He won't come to us until he understands us. He'll want us to come to him. Picard considered this for precisely the time it deserved. Then we go to him. The Raptor that ferried Picard, Troy, and Data to Galactica's landing bay was a colonial shuttle pressed into service as a diplomatic transport, its pilot, a young woman with tired eyes who introduced herself only as Starbuck and then said nothing else for the entire flight, handling the approach with the aggressive confidence of someone for whom flying was less a skill than a personality trait. The landing bay smelled of fuel and metal and the particular human scent of a space that had been lived in too hard for too long. Deck crew moved around them with the efficient wariness of people who had learned to assess strangers quickly and trust them slowly. Every face Picard saw carried the same quality Troy had identified in the transmission, not hostility, but the bone-deep caution of people for whom optimism had become a luxury they could no longer consistently afford. Commander Adama met them at the bay entrance. He was larger than Picard had expected, not physically imposing in any theatrical sense, but carrying the particular density of a man whose authority was structural rather than performed. He wore it the way the ship wore its scars. Not as decoration but as evidence. Beside him stood a woman whose civilian clothes and careful posture identified her as a political figure before she spoke a word. Captain Picard, Adama said. The handshake was firm, assessing, brief. Commander. This is Counselor Troy and Lieutenant Commander Data. Picard held Adama's gaze with the direct openness that was his preferred first contact posture, nothing hidden, nothing performed, the face of a man who meant what he said. Thank you for receiving us. You came to our space, Adama said. Seemed polite to receive you. The words were neutral but the eyes were doing something else entirely, reading, measuring, running the same calculations that 30 years of command had made automatic. President Roslin stepped forward. Laura Roslin. I'm the civilian leader of what remains of the 12 colonies of Kobol. She said it without self-pity, without drama, with the clean precision of someone who had made peace with the facts of her situation and found that peace useful. We have approximately 49,000 people across this fleet, Captain. We've been running for 8 months. We have limited food, limited fuel, and an enemy that doesn't stop. She paused. We're not looking for charity. We're looking for a place to catch our breath. Troy felt the emotional architecture of the room with the careful attention she brought to first contacts that mattered. Adama was guarded in ways that went all the way down, not a surface caution but a fundamental recalibration of his relationship with trust. Roslin was different. Roslin was open in the way that people who have nothing left to lose are sometimes open, not reckless, but freed from the particular anxiety of people who still have things they're afraid of losing. We have a briefing room, Picard said. I'd like to hear everything. From the beginning. Adama looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man deciding whether the risk was worth the cost and finding, against his better judgment, that it might be. It's a long story, he said. We have time, Picard said. For the first time in what I suspect has been a while, you do too. Something moved behind Adama's eyes. Not softness. Not relief. Something more durable than either, the recognition of a man who had been running so long that the concept of time as something other than a countdown had become genuinely foreign, hearing someone offer it back. He turned and led them deeper into the ship. The briefing took 2 hours. Adama spoke in the compressed, factual cadences of a military officer filing a report on events that had long since passed the threshold of what military language was designed to contain. Rosalind filled the spaces he left, the human texture, the political reality, the weight of 49,000 people whose survival had become the organizing principle of every decision either of them made. Data recorded everything. Troy felt everything. Picard listened with the focused, uninterrupted attention that was among his greatest command gifts, the ability to make the person speaking feel that what they were saying was the most important thing happening in the universe, which in this case it genuinely was. The Cylons had been created by humanity. They had evolved. They had rebelled. They had come back 40 years later with 12 humanoid models indistinguishable from humans and a mechanical army that outnumbered the colonial fleet's defenses by orders of magnitude. They had destroyed 12 worlds in 45 minutes. They had been hunting the survivors ever since with the patient, methodical persistence of something that did not experience fatigue and did not accept the concept of giving up. When Adama finished, the briefing room was quiet in the way that rooms became quiet when the information they contained was too large for immediate processing. The humanoid models, Data said, with the particular precision of someone identifying the detail that changed everything. Biologically indistinguishable from humans. To our technology, yes, Adama said. We've developed some detection methods. They're not perfect. To our technology as well, initially, Data said. He looked at Picard. Captain, our standard biosensors would not differentiate a silent humanoid model from a human being based on biological readings alone. The neural architecture differences are subtle enough to require a specifically calibrated scan. Picard absorbed this with the stillness of a man filing a threat assessment in real time. How many humanoid Cylons do you believe are currently embedded in your fleet, Commander? We don't know, Adama said. The 2 words carried the weight of 8 months of paranoia. We've identified and dealt with several. There may be more. There are always more. He held Picard's gaze with the direct, unsparing quality of a man who had decided that incomplete honesty was more dangerous than the complete variety. Which means if any of your crew has had contact with our people since we arrived, you have the same problem we do. The red alert klaxon fired before Picard could respond. Worf's voice on the comm was tight with controlled urgency. Captain, Drades, their sensors are showing it, our sensors are showing it. 2 contacts just dropped out of FTL approximately 40,000 kilometers off the port bow. Configuration matches nothing in Federation records. They're powering weapons. Adama was already moving. Base stars, he said. Not a question. They followed the breach. That was the tactical reality that landed on Picard with the particular force of problems that had no good solutions. The Cylons had tracked the colonial fleet through the dimensional jump and emerged in Federation space with the same relentless certainty that had defined their pursuit for 8 months. Whatever boundary had been crossed, whatever physics had been violated by the colonial FTL miscalculation, the Cylons had followed it with the methodical confidence of something that did not recognize the concept of sanctuary. Picard hit his comm badge running. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Mr. Worf, do not fire unless fired upon. I want 30 seconds to attempt communication. Captain, Worf said, with the tone of a Klingon warrior being asked to practice patience in the presence of an enemy actively powering weapons, they are launching fighters. Hailing frequencies. The response from the base stars was not language. It was a directed energy pulse that overloaded the Enterprise's communications array on the frequency they'd been broadcasting on and then methodically worked through adjacent frequencies with the systematic efficiency of something that had decided communication was not the objective. They don't talk, Adama said from beside him. Not to ships. Not in combat. He looked at Picard with the expression of a man who had spent 8 months learning the specific grammar of an enemy that expressed itself entirely in destruction. They talk to people. Up close. When they want something specific. He paused. Right now they want us dead. Then we oblige them differently, Picard said. Mr. Worf, return fire. Target their weapons arrays. Data, coordinate with Galactica's Combat Information Center. I want a combined tactical picture immediately. What followed was the kind of engagement that Starfleet Academy trained officers for in simulation, and that simulations, however sophisticated, never fully captured, the specific controlled chaos of a first combat encounter with an unknown enemy whose capabilities you were learning in real time at the cost of your hull plating. The Cylon raiders moved with an organic fluidity that suggested genuine intelligence rather than programmed response, adapting their attack vectors faster than standard fighter craft had any business adapting, pressing the Enterprise's shields in coordinated waves that probed for weak points with methodical patience. Galactica responded to the attack with the brutal, practiced efficiency of a ship that had been doing exactly this for 8 months. Adama's voice on the combined tactical channel was calm in the specific way that calm became a weapon, controlled, precise, issuing targeting coordinates and defensive adjustments with the compressed authority of a man who had run this exact scenario enough times to have stopped being afraid of it and started being very, very good at it. Viper squadrons. Launching, D reported from the Colonial comm feed. Apollo and Starbuck have the CAP. The Vipers hit the raider formation like something that had been angry about this particular enemy for a very long time, which they had. The dogfight that developed around the Enterprise's shields was unlike anything the Federation crew had witnessed. Colonial pilots flying with a ferocity that went beyond tactical training into something more personal, more absolute, the specific intensity of people fighting an enemy that had killed everyone they had ever loved. Worf watched the Viper engagement on tactical with an expression that began as professional assessment and migrated, over approximately 90 seconds, into something that a Klingon would recognize as respect. They're pilots, he said. They are exceptional. They've had practice, Troy said quietly. The first base star took 3 direct phaser hits to its central hub before its shields fully adapted, a window of approximately 40 seconds during which the Enterprise's weapons did genuine structural damage. The second base star maneuvered behind Galactica's blind spot and launched a nuclear strike that Galactica's point defense systems intercepted with the reflexive precision of a crew that had been intercepting nuclear strikes for 8 months and had developed opinions about it. Adama's voice on the channel, Enterprise, we need to jump. We can't sustain this engagement without knowing what other assets they have in this system. Picard looked at his tactical display. The math was straightforward and uncomfortable. 2 base stars were a manageable engagement for the Enterprise alone, but not while simultaneously protecting 37 civilian vessels with limited defensive capability. Agreed. Can you coordinate a fleet jump while we provide cover? Give me 4 minutes. You have 3, Picard said. Mr. Worf, full offensive pattern. Keep their attention on us. The next 3 minutes were the kind that got written up in after-action reports and discussed in Academy tactical seminars, not because they were extraordinary by the standards of what the Enterprise had faced before, but because of what they represented. The first time Federation and Colonial forces had fought side by side, improvising coordination protocols in real time under fire, and finding that despite every difference in technology and doctrine and civilization, the grammar of protecting the people behind you translated across any boundary. The fleet jumped. The Enterprise followed 17 seconds later, her shields at 62% and her crew running damage assessments before the jump completed. In the sudden silence of a new star system, the 37 colonial vessels reassembled around Galactica like a family finding each other after a catastrophe, the specific relief of counting and finding the number complete. Picard stood at the viewport and looked at the fleet and understood, with the clarity that combat sometimes produced, exactly what he was dealing with. Not refugees. Not visitors. Not a diplomatic situation to be managed through the application of Federation protocols and goodwill. A civilization. The last of one. And something behind it that did not stop. The Federation Council received Picard's emergency transmission with the particular quality of attention that governing bodies reserved for problems that didn't fit existing categories. 49,000 survivors of a destroyed civilization, pursued by a machine army of unknown total strength, currently sheltering in Federation space near the Cardassian border. The situation defied the standard diplomatic frameworks that the Council applied to first contact scenarios with the reliable efficiency of people who had developed good frameworks through long experience. Good frameworks required the situation to resemble something that had happened before. This one didn't. Counselor T'Pol of Vulcan was first to speak, with the measured precision her people brought to problems that required clarity before emotion. The immediate humanitarian obligation is not in dispute. Federation Charter Article 12 is unambiguous regarding displaced populations. We provide assistance. A pause. The strategic implications require considerably more careful consideration. 50,000 people, said Counselor Hawkins of Earth, with the blunt directness of someone who had spent 30 years in Federation politics and retained the habit of stating the obvious because the obvious was frequently what rooms full of intelligent people talked around. 50,000 people with no home, no planet, pursued by an enemy we know nothing about, carrying technology we've never encountered, and potentially harboring infiltrators we currently cannot detect. Another pause. The Prime Directive doesn't apply, they're clearly warp-capable, or the equivalent. But the security implications are significant, Admiral Nechayev said from the Starfleet intelligence feed, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone who had already run the threat assessment and arrived at conclusions she found uncomfortable. The humanoid Cylon models. Biologically indistinguishable from humans. If any have. Fleet, they're operating in an environment they've never encountered before. They may not even know it yet. Roslin absorbed this. You understand what you're asking. We've been through this before. Screening programs, detention protocols, the paranoia that comes with not being able to trust the person standing next to you. It damaged us. It nearly tore us apart. I know, Janeway said. Her voice carried something that was not quite sympathy but was its more useful cousin, acknowledgement. The recognition that a difficult thing was difficult without pretending it was something else. I'm asking anyway. Because the alternative is not screening anyone and operating on hope, and hope is not a security protocol. Adama looked at Roslin. The look between them was the compressed communication of two people who had been making impossible decisions together for 8 months. Not agreement necessarily, but the shared recognition that the calculation had already been completed and the answer was what it was. We'll cooperate, Roslin said. Full screening. But our people conducted alongside yours. Joint teams. No one from this fleet is screened without a colonial representative present. Agreed, Janeway said. The agreement lasted 6 hours before it became complicated. Dr. Gaius Baltar. The colonial fleet's chief scientist, a man of extraordinary intelligence and extraordinarily questionable judgment whose relationship with a humanoid Cylon model named Number 6 had been the specific crack in colonial security through which the original genocide had been enabled, had been running his own analysis of Federation medical technology since the first exchange of information with the Enterprise's medical staff. He arrived at Adama's quarters at 0200 ship's time with the look of a man who had found something he wasn't sure he wanted to have found. The Federation's biosensors, he said, without sitting down, without the social preamble he usually deployed to soften. Entered Federation space through the colonial fleet, and we have to assume they have. We are looking at a potential infiltration scenario that our current security protocols are not designed to address. On Galactica, in a civilian ship called the Rising Star that served as the fleet's primary meeting vessel, President Roslin sat across a table from Commander Adama and a Starfleet admiral who had arrived by shuttle from a nearby starbase with the speed of someone who had been dispatched before Picard's transmission was fully received. Admiral Catherine Janeway. Recently returned from the Delta Quadrant, carrying the particular authority of an officer who had navigated 7 years of isolation and emerged with her command instincts intact and her bureaucratic patience significantly reduced, had read the situation file during her shuttle transit and arrived with the focused pragmatism of someone who had stopped being surprised by impossible situations approximately 4 years into Voyager's journey. "Walk me through your detection protocols," she said to Adama, without preamble. "For the humanoid models." Adama looked at her with the measuring expression he applied to everyone and had applied to Picard and was applying now, the assessment of a man deciding how much to give. He gave more than Picard had initially received, which suggested that Janeway's directness had registered as a form of respect. Blood tests. Specific protein markers that our medical team identified after. Extensive experience. The markers are subtle. They require a calibrated test, not a standard scan. Dr. Crusher is already working on adapting the test to Federation medical technology, Janeway said. We expect a functional tricorder protocol within 48 hours. She looked at Roslin. In the meantime, full disclosure. Every member of your fleet submits to a preliminary screening. Not because we doubt you. Because we need a baseline, and because if there are humanoid Cylons in this unwelcome information, are significantly more sensitive than ours in certain frequency ranges. Specifically the ranges that correspond to the neural architecture differentials between human and Cylon physiology. He paused. If Dr. Crusher calibrates her tricorder correctly, and she will, she's extraordinarily competent, the Federation will be able to detect humanoid Cylons faster, more accurately, and more reliably than we ever could. Adama waited. With Baltar, the thing that mattered was never the first thing he said. There are currently 4 humanoid Cylon models aboard vessels in this fleet that our own screening has not identified, Baltar said. I've been running parallel analysis using the Federation sensor data they shared with us this afternoon. He set a data pad on the table. Names, ships, positions. Adama looked at the data pad without touching it. How long have you known? I completed the analysis 40 minutes ago. That's not what I asked. The silence between them was the specific silence of a man who knew exactly what was being asked and was deciding whether the truth served any useful purpose at this particular moment. Suspected, Baltar said finally. For some time. Suspected and lacked the tools to confirm. He met Adama's gaze with the particular courage of a man who had done terrible things and had decided that the only remaining currency he had was accuracy. Now I have the tools. And I'm telling you. Adama picked up the data pad. Outside, in the star field visible through Galactica's observation port, the Federation's nearest starbase glittered with the comfortable lights of a civilization that had not yet fully understood what had arrived in its space. In 6 hours, Adama knew, the joint screening would begin. In 6 hours, the 4 names on his data pad would become a crisis or a resolution depending entirely on how the next conversation with Admiral Janeway went. He opened his comm. The 4 Cylons were taken quietly, without incident, in the early hours of the ship's morning cycle when the fleet's population was at its lowest alertness and the joint screening teams had not yet assembled for the day's work. Adama had made the operational decision with the same compressed pragmatism he brought to everything. Move fast, move small, give the models no window to activate whatever contingency protocols their programming included for exactly this scenario. Colonial Marines and a single Starfleet security officer on each vessel, working from Baltar's confirmed locations, moving simultaneously across 4 ships so that no single detention could warn the others. It worked. All 4 were in custody within 11 minutes. Janeway received the news in the Starbase Operations Center with the expression of a woman recalibrating her assessment of a man she had already assessed fairly highly. He could have sat on that information, she said to Picard, who had arrived at the Starbase the previous evening for the Federation Council's emergency briefing. Used it as leverage. Traded it for better terms on the asylum application. He could have, Picard agreed. He didn't. Which tells us something. It tells us what Counselor Troy told us in the first 5 minutes, Picard said. That these people are exhausted and grief-stricken and operationally paranoid in ways that are entirely justified by their history. But that their commander's core values are sound. He paused. It also tells us that Adama understands something that the Council has been debating for 3 days, that the only way this works is if trust is built through action rather than negotiated through policy. The Council's debate had been exactly as fractious as the situation warranted. The humanitarian case for asylum was overwhelming, and several counselors had said so with the passionate directness of people for whom the Federation's founding principles were not abstract ideals but operational commitments. The security case for extreme caution was equally compelling, and Admiral Nechayev had made it with the flat, documented precision of someone who had spent her career thinking about the ways good intentions produced catastrophic outcomes. The two positions were not irreconcilable, but reconciling them required a framework that nobody had fully articulated yet. Into this debate, like a disruptor fired into a diplomatic reception, arrived a Klingon battle group. General Korath, commanding 3 birds of prey and a Katinga-class battle cruiser, had been conducting a routine patrol of the Federation-Klingon border when his long-range sensors detected the energy signatures of the battle between the Enterprise, Galactica, and the 2 Cylon base stars. He had arrived at the engagement site 17 minutes after the colonial fleet jumped, found the residual weapon signatures, analyzed them with the focused attention of a warrior reading a battlefield, and reached a conclusion that he transmitted to Picard without diplomatic preamble. These machine creatures, they have no honor. They do not face their enemies directly. They use infiltrators, deception, weapons that target civilians. Koratha's voice carried the specific contempt that Klingon culture reserved for enemies who violated the codes that made warfare meaningful. They are without honor and therefore without rights. We will engage them. General, Picard said carefully, the Cylons are currently not in this system. The colonial fleet is under Federation protection. I am not asking for permission, Picard. I am informing you of our intentions as a courtesy. A pause waited with Klingon certainty. These colonials, they have fought this enemy for 8 months with inferior technology and they have not broken. That is worthy of respect. The High Council will want to speak with their commander. Adama, when informed of this development, looked at Picard with the expression of a man who had spent 8 months operating in a universe with one mortal enemy and was now apparently acquiring stakeholders at a rate he found difficult to process. The Klingon want to meet with me. They want to assess you, Picard said. In their framework, the fact that you've survived this long against a superior enemy is a form of credential. General Korath is not a diplomat. But he is influential with the High Council, and the High Council's position on the Cylon threat will significantly affect what military resources the Federation can bring to bear. You're telling me I need to perform for them. I'm telling you that you are exactly what they respect, Picard said. A warrior who has refused to yield. You don't need to perform anything. You simply need to be what you already are. He paused. Though I would recommend against mentioning the civilian evacuation aspects of your mission in the first 5 minutes. The meeting between Adama and Korath took place in Galactica's starboard landing bay, Adama's choice of location, which Korath immediately read as a statement of territorial confidence and approved of accordingly. The Klingon general was physically massive, operationally direct, and possessed of the particular social clarity of someone who had never found ambiguity useful and had therefore never developed the habit of it. He walked a slow circuit of the landing bay, examining the Vipers with the hands-on assessment of a warrior evaluating weapons, running his fingers along hull scoring and weapons impacts with the focused attention of a man reading a history. He stopped at a Viper whose fuselage had been patched so many times the original paint was visible only in fragments. This one, he said. How many engagements? That Starbucks bird, Adama said. Kara Thrace. She stopped counting at 40. Korath turned to look at him with an expression that was the closest thing to warmth that his features appeared to support. Your pilots fight like people who have something worth fighting for, Adama said. The distinction registered. Korath was silent for a moment, the silence of a man encountering a perspective that challenged a framework he'd held for a long time without requiring its replacement, just its expansion. "The machine enemy," he said. "The ones who pursue you. They followed you through whatever passage brought you here. They always follow. Then they will come here again." Korath said it with the flat certainty of a tactical assessment. "In greater numbers, when they have confirmed your position." He looked at Adama with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of someone making a decision. "The Klingon Empire has not fought a war against machines. We find the concept distasteful." A pause. "We will find it less distasteful with sufficient motivation." "What kind of motivation?" "The kind that comes from watching an enemy without honor destroy what cannot defend itself." Koratha's eyes moved to the civilian ships visible through the landing bay's force field, the passenger liners and freighters and the school ship, clustered together in the star field with the particular vulnerability of things that had never been designed for where they found themselves. "We have children on those ships." It was not a question. But it was something. The specific thing that crossed whatever boundary existed between Klingon martial culture and the more fundamental architecture of what a civilization chose to protect. 4,300, Adama said quietly. "Give or take." Korath looked at the fleet for a long moment. When he turned back, his expression had completed whatever calculation it had been running. "I will speak to the High Council," he said. "You will have Klingon ships when the machines return." He extended his hand in a gesture that was neither Klingon nor colonial but universally legible. "They will return." "I know," Adama said, and shook it. Deep Space Nine sat at the mouth of the Bajoran wormhole like a pivot point between everything the Federation understood and everything it didn't, which made it, Sisko had long ago concluded, the most honest posting in Starfleet. You couldn't pretend the universe was manageable from DS9. The wormhole saw to that. Whatever came through it, Dominion warships, prophetic visions, the accumulated theological weight of an entire civilization's faith, arrived without warning and required a response before the responding was fully ready. Sisko had developed a functional relationship with unreadiness. He treated it as a baseline condition rather than a problem to be solved. The colonial fleet's arrival in Federation space had reached him through official channels 48 hours after the Enterprise's first contact, the report landing on his desk with the particular density of something that was going to require his personal attention regardless of whether his personal attention was what the situation officially called for. He had read it twice, called a senior staff briefing, and dispatched a runabout to the fleet's current position near Starbase 214, with drive Bashir aboard and a medical supply manifest that represented DS9's full humanitarian reserve. He had also, quietly, asked Odo to begin a parallel security assessment. Odo's assessment arrived on the second day after the colonial fleet's position was established, delivered in the flat, precise style of a security chief who had spent years on a station that was simultaneously a diplomatic hub, a military installation, and the universe's most significant geographic anomaly, and had developed his threat assessment protocols accordingly. "The 4 detained Cylon humanoid models," Odo said, standing across Sisko's desk with the particular stillness of a changeling who had chosen a solid form and inhabited it with complete commitment. "I've reviewed the interrogation transcripts from Commander Adama's team. 2 of them are providing information. 2 are not." He set a data pad on the desk. "The 2 who are talking have confirmed what Baltar's analysis suggested. There's a 5th model currently in the fleet that his sensor adaptation didn't identify. Different neural architecture variant. Newer." Sisko looked at the data pad without the immediate urgency that a lesser security situation would have produced. He had learned, on DS9, that urgency was a resource like any other. Spent carelessly, it depleted exactly when you needed it most. Location? Unknown. The 2 cooperative models either don't know or won't say. "I believe they don't know." The Cylon operational structure appears to deliberately compartmentalize model awareness to prevent exactly this kind of cascading identification. So there's an infiltrator in the fleet that our joint screening hasn't found and that the cooperative Cylons can't locate. Sisko considered this. And the fleet is currently at Starbase 214, with full access to Federation communication infrastructure. Yes, Odo said. Which is why I'm here rather than sending this by subspace. The implication sat between them with the comfortable weight of two professionals who had been working together long enough to communicate in implications rather than full sentences. If the fifth model had accessed Federation communication systems, internal channels, Starfleet frequencies, anything beyond the civilian subspace bands, then its position reports to the Cylon fleet were considerably more detailed than the colonial fleet's location data. It potentially knew Starbase defensive configurations, patrol routes, the location of the Enterprise and its current operational status. I need to go to Starbase 214, Sisko said. I've already filed the flight plan, Odo said. They arrived 14 hours later, the Defiant dropping out of warp alongside the assembled fleet with the compact authority that was the ship's primary characteristic. Sisko met with Adama in 12% outside the range of the current detection protocol. Not invisible, detectable, but only if you know to look in that specific range. He looked at Odo. Your people's sensor technology, the Federation's, is capable of it with recalibration. It would take me approximately 6 hours working with your Dr. Bashir to develop the modified protocol. 4. Bashir said from the doorway, where he had apparently been listening for the past 2 minutes with the bright, focused attention of a doctor who had found a problem interesting enough to make him forget he hadn't been invited into the room. 4 hours if we work in parallel and you stop explaining things I already understand. Baltar looked at him with the expression of a man encountering an intellectual peer and finding the experience simultaneously gratifying and competitive. 4 hours, he agreed. They found the fifth model 7 hours later. A woman named Elena who had been serving as a food distribution coordinator on the passenger liner Adriatic for 6 months, trusted by everyone who worked with her, genuinely liked by the civilian population she served, efficient and warm and possessed of the particular social intelligence that made her effective in exactly the role she occupied. She did not resist when Adama's Marines came for her. She sat across from Adama in Galactica's interrogation room with the composed, watchful stillness of a humanoid Cylon who had been activated for long enough to have developed something that looked very much like a genuine personality and was sitting with the complicated internal reality of what that meant. You knew it was only a matter of time, Adama said. I always know it's only a matter of time, she said. That's the part you don't understand about us, Commander. We don't experience capture the way you do. There's no defeat in it. She looked at him with the particular directness of someone who had decided that honesty was the only remaining option with Galactica's briefing room, the same room where Picard had sat 2 days earlier, its walls covered in the colonial fleet's navigational charts and tactical assessments and the accumulated operational intelligence of 8 months of survival. The room smelled of coffee that had been brewed and forgotten and brewed again, the specific olfactory signature of a command space that never fully rested. Adama received Odo's assessment with the stillness of a man who had stopped being surprised by this particular category of bad news and had transitioned entirely into the operational response mode that surprise used to interrupt. A fifth model. Different architecture variant. Newer, Odo confirmed. Which suggests the Cylons have been developing their humanoid technology continuously during your flight. The models you're familiar with may represent an earlier generation. The weight of that landed in the room with the specific gravity of a problem that, once understood, could not be ununderstood. 8 months of screening protocols calibrated to identify known Cylon models, and the possibility that the enemy had been quietly iterating on exactly those models the entire time, producing variants that the established detection methods would miss not through any failure of the methods but through the simple evolutionary logic of an enemy that learned. We need Baltar, Adama said. Baltar arrived with the barely contained energy of a man who had been waiting to be needed and had prepared extensively for the occasion. He had been working with DS9's science team remotely for the past 16 hours, a collaboration he had pursued with the focused enthusiasm of a researcher suddenly given access to equipment significantly superior to anything in the colonial fleet. He set 3 data pads on the briefing table with the precise placement of someone who had rehearsed this presentation. The newer model's neural variance, he said, operates in a frequency band approximately. Any interesting consequences? But there's no resurrection ship in this universe. If I die here, I'm gone. Permanently. A pause. That changes the calculation considerably. Adama looked at her for a long moment. What have you transmitted? Fleet position. Starbase configuration. The Enterprise's current operational status. She held his gaze without flinching. And the location of the dimensional breach point your jump created. The one the base stars used to follow you through. Another pause, longer, carrying something that might have been the closest available approximation of regret. They know exactly where it is. They can use it again. With more ships next time. Outside the interrogation room, in the corridor where Cisco stood with Odo processing the same information, the Defiance proximity alert fired. Long-range sensors. Multiple FTL signatures. Dropping out at the breach coordinates. Not 2 base stars this time. 6. 6 base stars represented a commitment. 2 base stars was pursuit, the minimum force required to destroy a fleet that had been running for 8 months and was presumed damaged and demoralized. 6 base stars was a statement. It said, we have assessed this new environment, we have received intelligence on what it contains, and we have decided that what it contains requires a different order of response. 6 base stars said that the Cylons had looked at the Federation and the Klingon battle group and the battered but functional Galactica and made a calculation that did not underestimate any of them. Cisco stood on the Defiance bridge and looked at the sensor readout with the expression of a man adding numbers that were coming out larger than he wanted. Time to intercept at current velocity. 4 hours, 17 minutes, Dax said from the science station, her voice carrying the focused calm she brought to tactical situations that required clear thinking rather than heroics. They're not rushing. They're moving at a pace that suggests they're waiting for something. Confirmation that their intelligence is accurate, Odo said. They want to verify fleet position before committing to an attack vector. Which means we have 4 hours, Cisco said. He hit his comm badge. Cisco to Adama. The response was immediate. Adama had been in CIC since the proximity alert. I see them. We need to talk about defensive options. The starbase has limited offensive capability. It was designed as a repair and resupply facility, not a combat installation. The Enterprise is currently 2 hours away at maximum warp. Karatha's battle group is 40 minutes out. Cisco paused. What we have right now, in this system, is the Defiant and Galactica. A brief silence. And the fleet. Commander. The civilian ships have FTL capability, Adama said. Not combat capability. But the Tilium ship, our fuel carrier, has been modified with point defense weapons over the past 6 months. That didn't fit his existing tactical categories and deciding whether to find it useful or offensive. He settled, apparently, on useful. The electromagnetic pulse, he said to Dax. Can Federation technology produce it at the required frequency? With the Defiance deflector array reconfigured as an EMP emitter, yes, Dax said. But it requires close range. Within 10,000 kilometers of the target base star's central hub. Inside their weapons range, Worf said. Significantly inside, Dax confirmed. Then someone has to get the Defiant that close while the base stars are occupied, Cisco said. He looked at the tactical display, at the formation of 6 base stars moving with the unhurried certainty of something that had decided the outcome in advance. Which means we need an engagement that draws 5 base stars' attention completely enough that the 6th doesn't respond to us until it's too late. Galactica, Adama said immediately. Commander. Galactica was built to fight base stars, Adama said, with the particular authority of a man stating a professional qualification. That's not bravado. That's what she is. She takes the fight to 5 of them directly. Karatha's battle group provides support, keeps the raider response suppressed, and you take the Defiant to the 6th. Karath leaned forward with the expression of a Klingon general who had found the plan's element of maximum danger and identified it as the most interesting part. 5 base stars against Galactica and 3 Klingon ships. Plus the fleet's armed vessels, Adama said. Karath was quiet for a moment. It is a good death, he said finally, which in Klingon culture was the highest available tactical endorsement. Nobody's dying, Adama said. Karath looked at him with an expression that suggested this position was philosophically questionable but tactically acceptable. We will discuss this afterward, he said. In the fleet's civilian ships, news of the approaching Cylons moved through the Celeste has a rail gun system that our engineers installed when we lost 2 of our escort vessels. Several of the larger freighters have been fitted with missiles. Another pause, shorter. We stopped being a purely civilian fleet about 4 months into the run. You survive long enough against an enemy like this and the line between military and civilian assets starts to blur in ways that aren't always comfortable but are always necessary. Sisko absorbed this. You're talking about putting civilian ships in a combat formation. I'm talking about using every asset available, Adama said, with the flat precision of a man who had made peace with exactly this category of decision long ago. Which is what you do when the alternative is losing. The tactical planning session that followed lasted 90 minutes and involved Adama, Sisko, Dax, Karath, who arrived with his battle group 45 minutes into the session with the focused energy of a Klingon general who had been informed there was a battle forming and had accelerated accordingly, and, unexpectedly, the 5th Cylon model. Elena had asked to speak with Adama 20 minutes after her interrogation, with the specific urgency of someone who had decided that her permanently mortal condition in this universe had rearranged her priorities in ways she was still processing. She had been escorted to the tactical planning room under guard, which she accepted without complaint, and she had looked at the sensor readout showing 6 Cylon base stars on approach and said something that changed the shape of the session. The lead base star, she said, indicating the formation's center vessel. The command architecture. 6 base stars deployed in that specific formation, arrowhead pattern, command ship centered. Means there's a hybrid aboard the lead vessel directing the others. A hybrid, Dax said. Part human, part machine. They interface directly with the base star's systems, navigation, weapons. Coordination. They're not like the humanoid models. They're not like the Centurions. They exist in a state somewhere between organic and digital that even we don't fully understand. Elena looked at the formation readout with the focused attention of someone reading a language they spoke natively. If you can disrupt the hybrid's connection to the base star systems, not destroy it, disrupt it, the other 5 base stars lose coordinated direction. They revert to individual operational protocols. Still dangerous. But not the unified tactical intelligence that 6 coordinated base stars represents. How do you disrupt it? Adama said. Not a question, a prompt. High-intensity electromagnetic pulse delivered directly to the base star's central hub. Specifically calibrated to the hybrid's neural frequency range. She paused. I know the frequency range. The room was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of silence that follows the arrival of information that is both exactly what you needed and deeply complicated by its source. Why, Adama said. Elena looked at him with the expression she had worn in the interrogation room, the composed, watchful directness of someone navigating a situation without a script. Because there's no resurrection ship in this universe, she said. I told you that changes the calculation. I'm not interested in dying for a mission that was designed in a reality where death was temporary. She held his gaze. I'm interested in surviving. And surviving here, in this universe, means this fleet survives. Because if it doesn't, I die with it and there's nowhere to go afterward. It was, Sisko thought, the most pragmatic case for cooperation he had ever heard. It was also, he suspected, not the complete truth. But it was enough truth to work with. Korath had been listening to this exchange with the expression of a Klingon general processing information. Population with the particular speed of information in enclosed communities, faster than official channels, slower than complete accuracy, carrying the emotional weight of a people who had survived 8 months of exactly this and had developed a functional, terrible expertise in what it felt like when the machines came again. There was fear. There was always fear. But underneath it, Roslin noted from the Rising Star's observation deck, watching the fleet prepare with the organized efficiency of people who had stopped being surprised by catastrophe, there was something else. Familiarity. The dark, durable familiarity of people who had faced this exact moment before and had found, each time, that they were still capable of facing it again. It was not hope exactly. It was something harder than hope. Something that had been tested enough times to know its own weight. She opened a fleet-wide channel. This is President Roslin. What's coming toward us is what has always come toward us. And what has... The Cylons dropped out of FTL at precisely the coordinates their intelligence had predicted, which was the first thing that went according to anyone's plan and the last thing for approximately 40 minutes afterward. 6 base stars materialized in arrowhead formation with the geometric precision of a force that had been executing this specific tactical pattern for 8 months and had refined it to the point where refinement had become redundancy. They knew it worked, they had never encountered a reason to change it, and the confidence that produced was the specific kind of confidence that occasionally became a vulnerability when the environment changed faster than the doctrine. The environment had changed considerably. Galactica came out of the dark at full military thrust on a direct intercept course with the formation's left flank, her main batteries firing before the base stars had completed their post-FTL sensor sweep. The opening salvo was not the measured, probing fire of a ship establishing range and testing defenses. It was the concentrated, committed fire of a ship that had been doing exactly this for 8 months and had developed precise opinions about where base star hull plating was thinnest and what caliber of kinetic energy weapon produced the most structurally consequential impacts at those specific points. Galactica hit the leftmost base star's central hub with the first volley and kept hitting it with the methodical persistence of a crew that had stopped thinking of this as a battle and started thinking of it as a problem with a known solution that required sufficient application of force. Koratha's battle group came in from above the formation's right flank simultaneously, the 3 birds of prey decloaking at point-blank range with the theatrical aggression that Klingon tactical doctrine elevated from technique to philosophy. The Katinga cruiser hit the formation's right anchor base star with a spread of photon torpedoes that registered on every. He redirected Galactica's main batteries to the base star's secondary hub, the backup command architecture that Cylon design placed in the lower section of the central structure, and fired continuous volleys with the disciplined rhythm of a crew that had been doing this long enough that the rhythm was automatic. Chief Tyrole's damage control teams moved through Galactica's corridors with the practiced efficiency of people for whom damage control had become the primary operational condition. Patching, rerouting, keeping systems functional through the combination of technical skill and the specific improvisational genius that 8 months of running repairs on a ship that was never fully in dock had produced. A conduit on deck 12 ruptured and sprayed coolant across a corridor and Tyrol was there in 40 seconds with a repair team, working around the spray with the calm of a man for whom this was Tuesday. Koratha's battle group was fully engaged with 2 base stars on the formation's right flank, and the engagement had the quality that Klingon tactical doctrine described as glorious, which translated, in practical terms, as maximum mutual damage inflicted at close range without either side yielding. The birds of prey were taking hits that would have disabled vessels without Klingon construction philosophy, which built warships on the principle that structural redundancy was the physical expression of honor. They were holding. Korath, on his bridge, was experiencing what his people called the fire of combat, which non-Klingons sometimes mistook for recklessness and was actually the specific form of clarity that came from being completely present in exactly the right situation. 5,000 kilometers, Dax said. Fire, Sisko said. The Defiant's deflector array discharged the reconfigured EMP in a focused pulse that hit the command base star's central hub at the precise frequency Elena had specified, the neural resonance frequency of a hybrid interface. Had made without consultation, and that she had received with the focused energy of a pilot who had been given the specific task she was best qualified for and knew it. She took her 4 Viper flight into the redirected Raider squadrons with the aggressive joy of someone who had been fighting this enemy for 8 months and had developed a relationship with the combat that was somewhere between expertise and obsession. "Anybody who gets past me answers to the Admiral," she said on the open channel, which was not her call sign protocol and was entirely characteristic. Nobody got past her. The Defiant closed to 9,000 kilometers from the command base star's central hub, inside weapons range, inside the effective radius of the base star's point defense systems, inside the distance at which the engagement stopped being tactical and became something more immediate and physical. The base star's energy weapons found the Defiant's shields and began the systematic work of reducing them, which they did with the methodical efficiency of Cylon weapons systems that had been calibrated against colonial shield technology and had never encountered Federation ablative armor before. The ablative armor held. Not indefinitely, nothing held indefinitely against 6 base star caliber energy weapons, but long enough. 7,000 kilometers. 6. The deflector array's EMP configuration required 5,000 kilometers for sufficient field intensity at the hybrid-specific neural frequency. Shields at 41%, Dax reported, with the calm of someone reading a gauge rather than describing an emergency. "Almost there," Cisco said. On Galactica's port side, the leftmost base star had taken sufficient structural damage to its central hub that its weapons output had dropped to 30% of initial capacity. Adama pressed the advantage with the focused aggression of a commander who understood that a damaged enemy given time to repair was simply a more expensive problem. Sensor in the system and produced, in Korath personally, an expression of professional satisfaction that his bridge crew recognized as the closest available approximation of joy. The Cylon formation fractured. Not broke, fractured. The hybrid aboard the command base star issued coordinated response orders through its direct neural link to the fleet's systems, redirecting Raider squadrons and repositioning the remaining base stars with the fluid intelligence of a unified tactical mind compensating for unexpected pressure. But the compensation required the formation to open, to spread its base stars to address threats from multiple vectors simultaneously. And opening the formation meant the command base star's flanks were exposed in ways the arrowhead's geometry had been specifically designed to prevent. Cisco watched the formation fracture on the Defiant's tactical display and felt the window open. "That's our approach vector," he said. "Maximum impulse." "Dax, how long to reconfigure the deflector array?" "Reconfiguration is complete," Dax said. "I finished it during the planning session." She looked at him with the expression of someone who had learned, over multiple lifetimes, that preparation was the only reliable substitute for certainty. "Of course you did," Cisco said. "Take us in." The Defiant hit full impulse and drove toward the command base star's exposed flank with the compact, aggressive velocity of a ship that had been built to do exactly this. Close fast, hit hard, survive things that should have killed it through the combination of ablative armor, quantum torpedoes, and the specific stubborn ingenuity of its chief engineer. The command base star's point defense system registered the incoming contact and redirected 2 Raider squadrons to intercept, which was the correct response and arrived approximately 40 seconds too late. Kara Thrace, Starbuck, had been assigned to the Defiant escort the moment Adama announced the tactical plan, a decision he calibrated to disrupt the organic digital connection that made the command base star's coordinated direction of the fleet possible without destroying the base star itself, because destroying the base star would produce a debris field at this range that the Defiant's damaged shields could not safely navigate. The effect was immediate and visible on sensors. The command base star's energy weapon output dropped to 0 in 0.4 seconds. Not because the weapons were destroyed but because the hybrid's directing intelligence had been temporarily disconnected from the systems it controlled, leaving the base star's mechanical functions running on local autonomic protocols that had no capacity for coordinated tactical response. The Raider squadrons operating under the command base star's direction fragmented. Individual raiders continuing their attack vectors without coordination, their tactical coherence dissolving into disconnected individual action. The other 5 base stars registered the command base star's status change, and the response was the specific response of a coordinated force that had just lost its coordinating intelligence, not collapse, but hesitation. A fractional pause in the tactical flow as individual base star hybrids reassessed without the overarching command structure that had been directing the engagement. In human terms it would have lasted less than 3 seconds. In combat terms it lasted an eternity. Adama's voice on the channel was precise and immediate. All ships, this is the moment. Full offensive. Everything we have. Galactica fired everything she had. Everything Galactica had was considerable. 8 months of running had stripped the Battlestar of comfort, of routine, of the peacetime rhythms that gave military service its human texture, but it had left something in exchange. A crew that had been tested so completely and so repeatedly that their operational capacity had been refined to its essential core, every unnecessary motion eliminated, every process compressed to its minimum viable form. They did not think about what they were doing. They simply did it, with the fluid, terrible efficiency of people for whom survival had become indistinguishable from competence. The main batteries fired in coordinated volleys that Adama directed from CIC with the compressed precision of a man conducting an orchestra that had been playing the same piece for 8 months and knew every note. The leftmost base star, already structurally compromised from the engagement's opening, took 3 volleys to its secondary hub in rapid succession and came apart in the specific way that silent base stars came apart when their internal power systems lost containment. Not an explosion in the conventional sense but a cascade, each system failure triggering the next, the base star's distinctive radial structure folding inward around the collapsing hub before the antimatter storage breach produced the final, silent detonation that left a debris field where a command vessel had been. The fleet's armed civilian ships had held formation on Galactica's flanks throughout the engagement's opening phase, their modified weapon systems providing point defense against raider attacks that would otherwise have pressed the Battlestar's flight deck. The Tilium ship's point defense batteries had accounted for 11 raiders in the first 20 minutes. Not a number that changed the strategic balance but a number that kept Galactica's Viper recovery operations functional, which kept the Viper pilots alive, which kept the only human fighter assets in the wrong moment. O'Brien was in the Jeffries tube beside the damaged array with 2 engineers and the focused, profane urgency of a man who understood that 23% shields in an active combat zone was an invitation rather than a safety margin. 3 minutes, he reported on the internal channel. 2 would be better, Sisko said. 2 would require different physics, sir. Sisko looked at the tactical display. The 4 remaining base stars were reorganizing. Not with the fluid coordination of the hybrid-directed formation but with the adequate, functional competence of individual Cylon systems adapting to changed conditions. The reorganization was taking longer than it should have because the Raider squadrons, still fragmented from the command disruption, were reassembling without the top-level coordination that would have made them maximally effective. Starbuck's flight was exploiting the fragmentation with the aggressive precision of pilots who recognized a tactical window and flew through it before it closed. But 4 base stars were 4 base stars. And the math, while improved from 6, was still the kind of math that required everyone to do their part at the right moment. Apollo's voice came through on the combined tactical channel. Lee Adama, flying CAP with the measured precision that distinguished his approach from Starbuck's aggressive improvisation, providing the tactical steadiness that balanced her velocity. Starbuck's flight is Winchester on missiles. Transitioning to guns only. Understood, Adama said from CIC. Pull back to defensive positioning. Protect the fleet. Copy that. A pause. The Klingon ships are, sir, they're doing something I've never seen before. Karatha's battle group had reformed after the second base star's destruction into a configuration that was not in any Federation tactical manual because it was specific to Klingon engagement philosophy in situations that called for what Karatha's people described as the engagement in the fight. In the calculus of a battle this size, 11 raiders was a contribution that mattered. Karatha's battle group had been trading fire with 2 base stars for 30 minutes, and the exchange had the quality of a Klingon engagement that had found its proper rhythm. The birds of prey rotating attack vectors in the rapid cycling pattern that Klingon tactical doctrine called the rotating fawn, each ship withdrawing as its shields degraded while the next pressed forward, maintaining continuous pressure without allowing any single vessel to absorb unsustainable damage. The Katinga cruiser had taken a direct hit to its secondary hull that had opened 2 decks to space, and Karath had responded by closing range and firing every weapon system simultaneously in what Klingon tactical doctrine did not have a formal name for because it was generally considered more commitment than calculation. It worked anyway. The second base star in Karatha's engagement took the mast fire from 3 kilometers range and lost its central hub entirely. Not the cascading failure that had taken the first base star but a direct, catastrophic structural breach that sent the base star's 6 arms drifting in separate directions on their individual momentum vectors, each one still carrying active systems and raiders and the remnant of a hybrid's consciousness processing damage reports for a ship that no longer existed as a unified structure. 2 base stars down. For remaining, operating without coordinated command direction, their individual hybrids reasserting local tactical control with the efficiency that Cylon systems were capable of when operating independently. Less effective than unified command. Still formidable. The Defiant had pulled back to minimum safe distance after the EMP discharge, her shields at 23% and her port weapons array offline from a base star energy weapon strike that had found the junction between her ablative armor panels at precisely section, the ship tumbling on its axis before emergency thrusters fired and stabilized it. 3 Klingon ships had gone in. 2 came out. The remaining 3 base stars registered the destruction of the 4th and made the calculation that Cylon tactical systems were designed to make, the assessment of force remaining against force required, the probability function of engagement outcomes, the logical determination of whether continued engagement served the mission's objectives. The mission's objectives had been the destruction of the colonial fleet and the elimination of whatever Federation assets had been protecting it. The colonial fleet was intact. The Federation assets had proven considerably more capable than the intelligence had suggested. 2 base stars had been destroyed, 1 had been incapacitated, 1 had been destroyed in collision, and the remaining 3 were operating without command coordination against an enemy that was damaged but functional and had demonstrated a willingness to sustain damage that exceeded expected parameters. The 3 remaining base stars jumped. The system went quiet with the specific quality of quiet that followed the end of something loud, not peaceful, not resolved, but absent. The raiders still in the system flew without coordination for approximately 90 seconds before their autonomous protocols directed them toward the base star jump coordinates, which were already empty. They continued on their last programmed vectors, their effective combat life limited by fuel reserves, and Starbucks flight picked them off with the efficient, unhurried precision of pilots cleaning up after the main event. On Galactica's CIC, Adama stood at his command station and looked at the Draughty's display as it registered clear, the specific, rare, temporary condition of a threat board with nothing on it. His crew around him was processing the same information with the particular quality of people who had been in sustained combat for long. Killing stroke, the moment in a battle when the enemy's position had been sufficiently degraded that the correct response was not continued tactical maneuvering but direct, committed, total engagement. The 3 birds of prey had lined up in a direct formation behind the Katinga cruiser, adding their tractor beams to the cruiser's own in a combined field that was hauling the largest of the remaining base stars toward the Katinga at full tractor strength. "They're going to ram it," Dax said, with the tone of a scientist identifying a phenomenon she had not previously observed. "Korath," Cisco said on the channel. "General, what is your status?" Karatha's voice came back with the specific quality of a Klingon warrior who had made a decision and was entirely at peace with it. "The cruiser's warp core is breached, Commander. We are venting plasma from 3 sections. We cannot maintain combat effectiveness for more than 7 minutes. A pause that contained no uncertainty whatsoever. 7 minutes is sufficient. General, there are other options. There are always other options, Korath said. This one is better. Another pause. Tell Commander Adama his pilots fight well. It has been an honor to fight beside them. Adama's voice on the channel was quiet and immediate. General. Your crew. My crew has chosen, Korath said. As Klingon choose. The Katinga cruiser hit the base star at full tractor-assisted velocity with the combined mass of 4 Klingon warships behind it, and the detonation that followed was visible from every ship in the system, a point of light that expanded and contracted in the specific physics of a warp core breach meeting a Cylon antimatter storage system. 2 catastrophic energy releases occurring simultaneously in a space small enough that they fed each other rather than dissipating independently. The debris field expanded outward in a sphere that caught the nearest bird of prey at its edge. Shields failed, hull breach on the port. Enough that its absence felt wrong before it felt like relief. Dee was crying silently at her station and not apologizing for it. Gaeta was running his post-battle system assessment with the steady hands of someone who had learned that the assessment needed to happen before the emotions, because the emotions were going to happen regardless and the assessment could wait for nothing. Adama picked up the phone. Damage report. Hull breaches on deck 7 through 9, Tyrole's voice came back, already in the middle of the assessment, already 3 steps into the response. FTL is operational. Main batteries at 60%. We lost 2 Vipers in the engagement, both pilots recovered. A pause. She held, sir. She always holds, Adama thought. He did not say it. He set down the phone and looked at the main screen where the debris of 4 destroyed Cylon base stars drifted in the expanding silence of a battle that had cost more than it was supposed to and achieved exactly what it needed to. Outside, in the fleet, 49,371 people were still alive. The aftermath of battle had a texture that was different from the battle itself. Slower, heavier, full of the specific weight of things that had been spent and could not be recovered. Koratha's Katinga cruiser was gone. 240 Klingon warriors, gone with it, by choice, in the manner that their culture had always held was the correct manner for a warrior's death and that the people mourning them were simultaneously certain was true and certain was insufficient. The surviving bird of prey crews held a remembrance ceremony that Adama attended uninvited and was welcomed into without comment, standing at the back of the Klingon vessel's assembly bay while warriors sang in a language he didn't speak about things he understood completely. He stayed for all of it. Targets it had assessed for less than 72 hours. Counselor T'Pol spoke first, as she usually did when the situation required clarity before resolution. The strategic situation is no longer theoretical. An aggressive non-Federation force has engaged Starfleet and Klingon assets in Federation space. The colonial fleet's presence did not create this threat. It revealed a threat that would have arrived regardless, through whatever dimensional breach the colonial FTL created, once the Cylons determined that breach was navigable. She paused. The question of colonial asylum is therefore no longer purely humanitarian. It is strategic. Produced more operational intelligence about Cylon combat doctrine than Starfleet had accumulated in the entire 72 hours since first contact. 8 months of direct engagement. Developed counter-tactics that work with significantly inferior technology. Identified vulnerabilities in Cylon command architecture that we exploited successfully in the battle. She looked at Adama. Starfleet wants to formalize that knowledge exchange. Officially. Adama looked at Roslin. Roslin looked at him. The compressed communication of 8 months of shared impossible decisions, moving through a glance. What does formally mean? Adama said. It means your tactical staff works with ours, Janeway said. Your engineers work with ours, the Tilium propulsion system your people use has applications our scientists are extremely interested in. Your medical team works with Dr. Bashir on the Cylon detection protocols. A pause. It means that the colonial fleet stops being a refugee convoy and starts being a contributing member of a defense arrangement. We've been contributing members of a defense arrangement, Adama said. We contributed 4,300 children and an old Battlestar. I know, Janeway said. She said it without deflection, without the diplomatic softening that might have made it easier to receive and less true. I know what you've already given. I'm asking you to give more, in exchange for something more substantial than provisional sanctuary. She set a data pad on the table. The Federation Council has authorized me to offer the colonial fleet a permanent settlement option. There are 3 uninhabited Class M planets within Federation space that meet human habitability requirements. Terraforming assistance if needed. Full Federation protection. The briefing room was quiet. Not the tactical quiet of people processing threat assessments, but the different, deeper quiet of people encountering something they had stopped believing. The vote was not unanimous. It was decisive. The colonial fleet was granted provisional sanctuary within Federation space, subject to joint security protocols and the continued cooperative screening program that Baltar and Bashir had developed. The provisionality was honest rather than conditional, a recognition that the long-term arrangements required more negotiation than the immediate emergency allowed, and that pretending otherwise served no one. Roslin received the news in Galactica's briefing room with Adama beside her and Picard across the table, and her expression was the expression of a woman who had learned to hold good news carefully, not skeptically, but with the particular gentleness of someone who had been burned enough times to know that good news was fragile and required handling. Provisional, she said. For now, Picard said. The Council moves slowly on permanent arrangements. It moves considerably faster than this on most things, which gives you a sense of how seriously they're taking the situation. The Cylons will come back, Adama said. It was not a question and it was not pessimism. It was the operational assessment of a man who had 8 months of data on exactly this subject. Yes, Picard said. They will. And when they do, the Federation will be considerably better prepared than we were 72 hours ago. He looked at Adama with the direct, unadorned honesty that was his preferred mode when the situation called for something more substantial than diplomatic language. We've never fought a machine enemy before. Not like this. The Borg are machines in some sense, but the Borg want to add you to themselves. The Cylons want to eliminate you entirely. That's a different kind of war and it requires different thinking. It requires thinking that these people have already done, Janeway said from the doorway. She had arrived from Starbase 214 that morning and had spent 2 hours with Adama's tactical staff in a session that had available to them. A place to stop. Actual ground. The thing that 49,000 people had been running toward for 8 months without being certain it existed. Roslin looked at the data pad for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were clear and her expression was the expression of a woman who had been carrying the weight of a civilization's survival and was being offered, for the first time, the possibility of setting it down without dropping it. We'll want to see the planets, she said. Of course, Picard said. Adama stood and moved to Galactica's observation port, the same port where he had stood on 100 nights during the run, looking at the fleet, counting the lights, reassuring himself that the number was still the number it was supposed to be. The fleet was there. All 37 vessels. The lights were on. The number was right. Elena. The 5th Cylon model, held in cooperative custody rather than conventional detention, her situation as unresolved as everything else, had asked to speak with him that morning and he had gone, because she had given him the frequency that had won the battle and he owed her the conversation. She had asked him what happened to Cylons in a universe without resurrection. He had told her he didn't know. She had said that was the most honest thing anyone had ever told her. He thought about that now. About what it meant to exist in a universe where death was permanent, for Cylons, for Klingon warriors, for the 2 Viper pilots who had not come back from the engagement and whose names he would add to the wall of remembrance before the day was out. Permanence was not comfort exactly. But it was weight, and weight was real, and real things could be built on. He turned from the viewport. There was work to do. The colonial fleet did not find Earth in the Star Trek universe. What they found was something the 49,000 survivors had stopped believing was possible, a future that was not defined entirely by what they were running from. The 3 Cylon-based stars that had jumped from the battle would return, as Adama had said they would, and the war that followed would reshape both civilizations in ways that neither fully anticipated. The Federation would learn things about fighting a machine enemy that its most optimistic strategists had hoped never to need. The Colonials would learn things about a universe where diversity was a philosophy rather than an accident, where diplomacy was practiced with genuine conviction, where the question of what humanity owed to the things it created had been asked and imperfectly answered and was still being asked. Elena would remain in a category that no existing framework adequately described, neither prisoner nor citizen, neither enemy nor ally, a Cylon in a universe where resurrection was impossible and choice therefore meant something different than it ever had before. What she chose, in the months that followed, would become one of the more complicated diplomatic questions the Federation Council had ever been asked to adjudicate. Adama would stand at many more viewports, counting many more lights. The number would not always be right. But it would always be the most important number he knew. Live long and prosper. More stories await.